Dr. Oblinger, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Good to have you here, and I want to start off with giving you a chance to talk about why you believe that New Mexico State would be a good fit for you.
Well, I'd be happy to do that. If you've looked at my record, you perhaps have noticed that for 42 years, I've in one way or another been associated with a land-grant institution. 5 years as a student at Iowa State. My first job was on the faculty at the University of Florida. I followed that with a couple of years in academic administration at the University of Missouri. And then the last 23 years have been at North Carolina State in Raleigh as an associate dean, then a dean, then the provost, and most recently as the chancellor.
Tell me, as you take a look at NMSU, what you think the major challenges are for this university.
Well, I think the major challenges for New Mexico State and just about every other public and private institution in America is the economy and the budget situation. I think that's very severe, particularly when you're trying to maintain a quality program for your students and you're trying to retain or attract in the first place a high caliber faculty, reward them, recognize them, because we all know that the quality of any program, particularly in higher education or education in general, comes from those faculty who generate that program, and then the students benefit from it.
Tell me about how your experience helps you with the kind of challenges that deal with fiscal matters.
Well, I've had a lot of experiences I've just tried to outline to you. And if you're at a public university like North Carolina State or New Mexico State, you recognize that state support is very important. But it is state support. It doesn't pay all of the bills. For example, in North Carolina, we have been blessed with a citizenry that invests heavily in education. North Carolina State's budget is 46% derived from the state. I believe New Mexico State budget is about 37%. And that leaves, to get to 100%, quite a few percentage points. And I think we all recognize, at least in public institutions, that those percentages, whatever they are probably not going to get greater. And so you have to start to look at what are the options? Where can you generate revenue that will help you maintain that quality program that you want for your students, whether they're undergraduates or graduate students? And you're at a land-grant university, which historically has been a statewide impact in terms of everything that is done here and at the outlying stations, which I know you've got several of, and so does North Carolina. So I've got that in common. And to your question, how do you help the budget situation from now on? Hopefully the cash flow will resume and be reasonable. But if you don't have a high quality faculty that can compete for grants and contracts at the federal level, then it's going to be difficult. If you don't have a fundraising arm of the university that recognizes that a margin of excellence may in fact come from outside funding, from donors, from corporations, from individuals who want the university to do well and are willing to support it. I think all of those factors come into play when you look from now into the future in terms of support, particularly at public institutions.
As you look at NMSU, what areas do you think the university really is a leader in, where we really excel?
Well, I think there's some areas of research that if you're not first, you're second to none. I haven't been able to figure it out, but when I look at the unique opportunities in the future, I think New Mexico State is very well positioned. I'd use energy as an example. I'd use water, which I think is the #1 challenge around the world. And here, water in an arid environment, we ought to be the experts in that. And I know you've committed to sustainability, and that has a whole depth and breadth associated with it in its own right. Those are areas which are futuristic, in my opinion, and New Mexico State is positioned very well for that. And then if you look at the demographics of New Mexico State University, of the state, that also represents some of the future. When you look at the majority becoming the minority becoming the majority, you're already positioned for this well. And leadership from across all of that diversity should come from a place like New Mexico State.
Okay. Public broadcasting plays a unique role here because in addition to providing educational opportunities for students and for the community, this is the only television station in southern New Mexico, and we also operate the only radio stations that have a news and public affairs focus in the area. I want to get your take on how you see public broadcasting as part of the mission of the university.
Oh, great question. You perhaps know of UNC-TV, which is representative of a 17-entity university system in North Carolina. PBS fills a very unique role, and if I look at the programming that's available from PBS stations, this one in particular, they have high impact educational dimensions to them, things that you can't see on, shall I say, ordinary television networks. You've got representation of a great university simply by hosting both the television and the radio. I think that's a very important hallmark to have New Mexico State University associated with PBS the way that it is.
Okay. Earlier you addressed the issue of fiscal matters, and I know really all across the country, university presidents are increasingly being called upon to raise private funding. I'm curious to find out how you make sure donors don't have an undue influence on a university.
Also a good question. You do that by, from the get-go, from the very beginning, with a donor or a prospective donor, making it very clear that those funds that come from either an individual donor or an organization or a corporate entity are going to be largely without strings attached. We have committees that agree and approve the types of gifting that we receive, and they very carefully adhere to those kinds of guidelines. We just had a department named for $10 million. That was fulfilling a dream of a fellow who thought he would never be in that position, a graduate of North Carolina State, someone who wanted to help, someone who wanted to give back, someone who was in a position to do it. But he just said, take the department that I graduated from and make it a top 5 department. He didn't claim to know exactly how to do that, but he trusted us with significant dollars to do so, and we're making great progress.
Okay. Another national trend, as you know, universities, and some of this I know is budgetary as well, have fewer tenure track positions. And as you know, some folks are concerned about the impact that that might have on academic freedom. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure about the impact on academic freedom, but let me address that. Yeah, I think that should be a concern, and it is a concern in both public and private institutions. How many faculty do you have on the tenure track, and how much are you relying on what we would call back in North Carolina non-tenure track faculty? I think there are a couple of very critical things there. They can't be second-class citizens. They aren't people that, at least in my experience, you just reach out and bring in. They are thoroughly vetted. They have quality of instruction in mind, or they wouldn't be interested in positions like that. And we've even created some positions that are exclusively for non-tenure track faculty members, but they go beyond a single term of employment or a single year. They're multi-year contracts. That provides continuity to the program delivery. The other important factor in that is the collegiality that takes place and the mutual respect of tenure track faculty and non-tenure track faculty. I think that at least at North Carolina State University, we've done a good job of balancing that.
Okay. As you've addressed the university and the community, and for that matter, the entire state of New Mexico,
yes,
has a lot of diversity. And I'm curious to find out your take on how you ensure that a campus is a welcoming place for everybody.
Well, I think diversity, and I would add to that inclusiveness, starts at the top. You don't just ask people to do it. You demonstrate that that is the way it's going to be. That's the way it should be. That's one of the attractive aspects here at New Mexico State. You have a diverse community. It's shaped a little differently than the community I would be coming from, but you have tremendous diversity, and that diversity is in tune with the way the country is going. If my memory serves me correctly, North Carolina as a state is the third fastest growing Hispanic community in these United States. That surprises a lot of people, but I've seen the numbers and it's true. And we are way behind as it relates to bringing on representative numbers of faculty to meet those representative numbers of Hispanic students who are coming to us. That's just one example.
As you may know, with cuts in state funding, university employees have seen a reduction in their take-home pay due to increased employee contributions for retirement.
Yes.
The state budget, as you know, and you've addressed this, is going to be under pressure for years to come.
Quite some time.
And it brings a question. As president, if you were chosen for this position, would you be willing to take local action to ensure that there were competitive compensation packages when the state fails to take action on a yearly basis?
Well, my interpretation of your question, and if I don't absorb this correctly, help me through it, but local action. Let's go back to fundraising. We just completed at North Carolina State, under my leadership, a $1.34 billion capital campaign for a land-grant university without a medical school in the southeastern United States. That is unheard of. So it was quite an accomplishment. And built into that capital campaign were such things as, well, everyone talks about endowed professorships. We had many of those that have come through that campaign. Scholarships and fellowships, yes. One of the attractive features that I've found sells pretty well with donors is the idea of an endowment established to provide supplements to salaries so that you can attract the best. You might have a base salary, but an eminently qualified individual who would fulfill a particular role on the faculty, and you use the endowment to add to that base salary. We've had great success through the years with that, not just with this capital campaign, but going back in the 1950s and 60s when donors gave us that flexibility, wanting to reward and recognize key faculty, and at the same time wanting to attract young people who might not be able to go to school if they didn't have scholarship or fellowship support, undergraduate and graduate respectively. I think that's one of the hallmarks of the land-grant university, and that is accessibility and affordability. Our two states have kept tuition relatively, if not very low, for in-state students. I think that speaks to that land-grant mission.
Okay. This issue has an enormous effect as well, as you know, on the community, because New Mexico State is the area's largest employer. In terms of increasing economic development in the area, New Mexico State is reaching out in a lot of different ways,
Yes.
developing new partnerships in the community. What experience do you have in working with local governments, with school districts, with other partners to develop the area in North Carolina?
Well, those are all key partners, and one of the things that I'd like to think that I do reasonably well is build relationships that are long-lasting and partnerships that are long-lasting, not for my benefit, but for the benefit of the institution. And the example I would use would be our Centennial Campus. Our Centennial Campus, I didn't start our Centennial Campus, but it's in its 25th year. 2 years ago, during my chancellorship, it was recognized as a top science research park by the Association of University Science Parks. Now, in reality, the RTP, the Research Triangle Park, a lot of people know about RTP and the way it's brought economic development to the central area of North Carolina. Well, 10 years ago, in 1997, the Research Triangle Park, which is turning 50 years old this year, got the same recognition from the same organization. We got it 2 years ago from the same organization at age 23. I think that speaks to the way that we've developed partnerships and relationships. Centennial Campus is a site where you have business, government, industry, and academia together. No one other than NC State faculty and departments and colleges are on Centennial Campus unless they have a relationship with North Carolina State. So if I talk about a government agency like the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, APHIS, every APHIS employee east of the Mississippi is headquartered on our Centennial campus. If I talk about the corporate sector, particularly in engineering, the Red Hat, the open source world's leader in open source computing, their international headquarters is on Centennial campus. That list goes on and on, but it's taken time and effort to develop those relationships and to develop those partnerships. But we are the model. We have visitors every week from all over the world to see how we did it. And it's not easy. It takes a lot of work, and one person is not solely responsible. It's a team approach.
Okay. I wanted to give you a chance to address your resignation as Chancellor at North Carolina State. As you know, there's been a lot of media coverage in
Yes.
this area about the issue, and a lot of campus discussion about the incident in which North Carolina's First Lady was hired at the university.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Easley was hired in 2005 by NC State on a fixed-term contract. What doesn't often come out is that since 1993, that same Mary Easley has taught courses on a course-by-course basis at North Carolina State University prior to becoming First Lady. And since 1994, 11 years before we executed that contract in 2005, she was employed on the faculty, the School of Law faculty, at North Carolina Central University, which is part of our 16 campus constituent system of the University of North Carolina. So when the Provost executed that contract with Mary Easley to continue her teaching and at the same time develop a signature lectureship series consistent with something we wanted to do in our strategic plan that would bring much more attention to the work taking place at NC State and the role that we played not only in the state, but in the region, in the nation. The Millennium Seminar series resulted from that employment. She was uniquely qualified to do that because of her networks. Examples of individuals that came to campus. Former Senator, from New York, Bradley came. Lindsey Graham came the day that the Guantanamo legislation was signed at the White House. We've had Charlie Rose, PBS man that I'm sure you know, great guest. Robert Reich, former, and still an economist par excellence. Donna Shalala, Secretary of HEW, now President at the University of Miami. And one Bill Clinton, more recently. And those seminars did exactly what we had hoped they would do over that period of time. The Provost initiated another contract in 2008. I did not know the amount of salary associated with that contract until after the contract had been signed. It was for a large increase in salary for a very significant increase in duties and responsibilities. Mm-hmm. Because of the size of that salary, it created a lot of media interest and public interest.
As I understand it, her initial salary was around $80,000.
That's correct.
Then the increase was to $170,000?
That is correct.
Okay.
You're exactly right on the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And the bottom line of that is that I would hasten to point out that our Board of Trustees approved both the position and that salary, as did our Board of Governors, which is the 32-member board that oversees the entire university system. Those were approved at those levels. The other thing that needs to be noted here is that, as you know, our former governor now is in the midst of a federal and a state investigation. When that was initiated in late 2008, that generated a lot of media interest, a lot of public interest that included examining the hiring of the First Lady in 2005. Those investigations continue, but that's the story on the hiring of the First Lady, who has had actually tremendous experience in our system and had been on other people's faculty as well.
Okay. One final point in connection to this. The
Yes.
Raleigh, North Carolina News and Observer reports that your provost, who you have just mentioned
Yes.
as hiring the First Lady, also resigned over this issue. And the day
Correct.
before his resignation, you had arranged a deal in which he would be paid $310,000 over 3 years on top of his faculty salary. But the deal was rejected as being against university policy. I wanted to give you a chance to
Sure.
also address this decision to offer this $310,000 package to your
I'd be
provost?
happy to, and I appreciate the opportunity to address that. There are at least 3 offices that had an opportunity to review that letter. It's a letter called a retreat right letter. It did go through the Office of Legal Counsel. It went through Human Resources. It went through my office. I did sign that letter, and I signed that letter assuming that the right parties had looked at it. As I look back at that, and I could assure you and anyone that's interested that if you look at what has happened since then, those processes have been refined to where that will never happen again. And I would tell you it was a mistake for me to sign a letter that was wrong, but I did do that. I would never do that again. I would absolutely assure everyone associated with it, including our Board of Trustees, that the letter of the law, the policy, was followed, or I wouldn't sign such a letter.
Mm-hmm. You address it as being, in your words, wrong in terms of, I assume, that it was against university policy. Do you have anything to say about the decision to offer the $310,000 package?
That offer was consistent with the last severance package that I signed. We've had retreat rights that have varied 3 times during my time as Provost and as Chancellor. And I simply did not feel that I needed to be up on all of those university policies with so many other checks and balances that I assumed were in place that obviously were not in place.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to add as we conclude our time together today?
No, I appreciate very much the opportunity to address particularly those questions because I know they're out there and they should be out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.